Starting. Let's get started. Got a lot to do. All right. That's good enough. Got a lot to go over. I missed last night's stream, had an anxiety attack, did not feel like sitting still. Had to rather be moving or be sleeping. So, yeah, I might be a bartender, might be busy usually late nights, but I also have blood sugar issues. I also have anxiety issues. So sometimes life just gets too much. But I got everything lined up, so let's do it, huh? Stony Progressive. I'm gonna pack one up, start out here, and let's get the scenes going. Let's get some people joining and see how the night goes. Welcome in. Interview Sunday. I got some interviews, discussions, multiple person conversations, all important stuff. I got Biden. I got Kamala Harris. I got the North Carolina Senate race. All good information. So let's take a look. Let's jump in. Let's get started. And we're going to start out today with the Abby Martin discussion with the real news. That is going to be how the media manufactures bloodlust for war. Manufacturing consent, I believe, is what we would call it, guys. And my book is here somewhere, but I have manufacturing consent on tap. As you can see, manufacturing consent. Got lots of notes in that one. So that's a good book to have. And everybody should have it on their mantle. But I'm going to pack one up and let's start out with some Abby Martin.
Welcome, everyone, to the Real News Network. My name is Maximilian Alvarez. I'm the editor-in-chief here at the Real News, and it's so great to have you all with us. Today is Saturday, March 5th, and the world continues to watch in horror as the full-scale Russian military invasion wreaks havoc on Ukraine and its people and pushes the world closer to the ever-approaching brink of global catastrophe. Since this invasion began on February 24th, nearly 1.3 million people have fled the fighting in Ukraine, and at least 351 civilians have been killed, according to the United Nations. According to the latest updates from the news agency Reuters, quote, Russian forces seized the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in eastern Ukraine, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, after a building at the complex was set ablaze during intense fighting with Ukraine defenders. The U.S. Embassy in Ukraine called the Russian assault on the Zaporizhzhia plant a war crime. The European Union, the United States, Britain, and others have hit Russia with a wide range of sanctions after its invasion of Ukraine. The sanctions span various industries and include financial, energy, export, and travel bans. Russia's large banks are deeply integrated into the global financial system, and the country is one of the world's biggest energy producers, meaning sanctions could disrupt economies around the world, end quote. In his first extended remarks about the war since the invasion began, Russian President Vladimir Putin said today, quote, these sanctions that are being imposed are like the declaration of war, end quote. Then, in a deeply ominous and chilling statement about the response to the invasion by Ukrainian and world leaders, Putin went on to say, quote, the current leadership needs to understand that if they continue doing what they are doing, they risk the future of Ukrainian statehood, end quote. In today's interview, we're going to be taking a look at the media side of war and at the ways our mediated connections to war and to each other can limit
censorship, propaganda, guys. This is the key fundamentals of what's happening, what's going on right now. We are being censored. We are being propagandized, and yeah, these are the key fundamentals of the war that we're currently witnessing. And I don't even know if we're witnessing a war. It's hard to decipher, really. It really is.
how we think and act, but also how we can use the tools available to us from social media to independent news, to think more clearly and act more bravely and lovingly. And I couldn't be more honored to be joined today by my guest, who is very much dedicated to that struggle and has been for quite some time. Abby Martin is an American journalist, show presenter, activist, and artist. She helped found the citizen journalism website Media Roots. She is the host of the invaluable investigative documentary and interview series, The Empire Files, and she has been involved in numerous film projects, including producing the recent feature documentary Gaza Fights for Freedom, and she is currently producing another feature entitled Earth's Greatest Enemy. Abby, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a great honor to be talking to you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's almost like, where do we start, right? Because there's so much to talk about and so much invaluable experience that I know that viewers and listeners would love to hear you speak on. But I suppose we should start with kind of the most recent news, just that happened just this week. For viewers and listeners who may not have seen, news broke a couple days ago that RT America announced that it would cease productions and would lay off most of its staff. Now, for viewers and listeners, RT America was a US-based news channel headquartered in Washington, D.C. It was owned by TV Novosti, operated by production company TNR Productions, and it was part of the RT Network, a global multilingual television news network that is funded by the Russian government. And RT America has hosted the likes of critical voices, including Chris Hedges, Lee Camp, Anders Lee, and, of course, Abby Martin. And before viewers and listeners jump down our throats and shout about this, we want to kind of take a measured look at this, because this isn't just RT America. Radio Sputnik has also been taken off a lot of podcast platforms, and they host shows like By Any Means Necessary, hosted by Jacqueline Luqman and Sean Blackman, a show that I've been on many times to talk about worker issues, labor struggles, strikes, so on and so forth. And of course, Russia is not the only country that has funded news agencies around the world. The US has many. So with that, all those caveats in mind, Abby, I wanted to just get your thoughts and impressions on the news of the shuttering of RT America, and I guess what you think this may portend, not just for media that has any ties whatsoever to the Russian state, but any media that in fact doesn't toe the national line, or it takes critical stances that aren't well received in the fog of war. What are your thoughts? What are your impressions?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up really salient points that I think need to be explored first and foremost. The first one is we need to be honest and not hypocritical when we're looking at the landscape of media that we all need to navigate as responsible critical thinkers today. Of course, we all know the problems with corporate media. Of course, I don't need to tell viewers of Real News Network why that's problematic. And that's why you see foreign funded networks like Russia today cynically, let's be honest about this, I mean, cynically filling that void, that huge void left by the corporate media apparatus, the void of, the lack of real reporting, substantive coverage of issues like third-party candidates occupy Wall Street. And in fact, that is what this is really about. This is about the suppression of and purging of all dissident voices in the landscape of alternative media. I mean, the U.S. establishment has been clamoring for years to do this, to purge everyone that doesn't kind of toe the line of what the U.S. foreign policy establishment wants. And we saw this come to a head with the DNI report. When Trump won the election, of course, there was a deliberate effort to absolve the political establishment's failures or accountability or reckoning of how we got to this place. And instead, they just wanted to blame Putin. And not only blame Putin for undermining our, alleged democracy, but also Russian media as this huge, sinister propaganda effort that really sowed this sinister, distrust and discontent with American institutions. And that's actually what gave us the rise of Trump. It was Russian media, these, $10,000 or whatever very menial amount of Facebook ads that, did this and that. And really,
Nothing.
it's kind of
Just these
laughable when
tiny
you look at
nothing
how
ads.
much does the U.S. really meddle in, in foreign policy all around the world? How much does the U.S. undermine sovereignty of countries all around the world? How much has the U.S. really pumped its own propaganda and dominated this kind of cultural hegemony over the rest of the world? The list goes on and on and on. But what they really did was grossly exaggerate the effect and impact of Russian propaganda to deflect what they were doing, how Trump came to be. So this is kind of this is basically the culmination of a years-long plan to purge all alternative media, whether it's people, opposing the assassination of General Soleimani and the purging of pro-Iran voices on networks like Twitter and Facebook. But really, it's the kind of coalescing of big tech Silicon Valley giants working and acquiescing with state government policy. And what's scary about this is there wasn't even legislation that demanded them to do so. This was a kind of a preemptive coordination with the government on behalf of organizations like Google and Facebook. And you saw the fact checking go into account, where you had people like on the board of Atlantic Council. This is defense contractor funded think tanks that were now tasking themselves with fact checking. So all of this put together brings us to today, which is Russia Today America, the American bureau in DC, shuttering its doors, I'm assuming as the result of constrictive sanctions that have basically made it untenable and impossible to run the bureau. This is after we see YouTube straight up banning and removing all RT platforms in Europe. I mean, this is a huge swath of territory that now you cannot access the Russian perspective. And then we saw US distribution, of course, cut off Russia media. That includes Comcast and DirecTV, I'm pretty sure. And as you mentioned, it's not just the cartoonish depiction of a Putin-run propaganda network. I think it's very obvious by its name, Russia Today, that it's Russian state media, that it parrots the bias of Russia, and that it peddles Russian talking points. That's not a shocking declaration. The problem is that we have the U.S. corporate media, which basically acts as the arm of the Pentagon whenever we need critical dissent against U.S. foreign policy. These voices kind of uniformly come together, they coalesce, and they essentially just echo whatever the foreign policy line is of the U.S. empire and its junior collaborators. And that is a highly sophisticated propaganda model that we basically parrot and declare as free press. We herald and cherish the notion of free press in this country, but what does that really mean if we have this ever constrictive media apparatus that essentially only echoes corporate media talking points? I mean, this is an apparatus that is controlled by 5 corporations. It affects more than 90% of everything we see, hear, and read. And for me, as a critical thinker and as someone who really cares about what our government is doing abroad, I feel like I need to have a wide range of views that I can navigate on my own. And I don't want the infantilizing effect of censorship. I don't want my reality curated for me by big tech giants. I want to be able to pick and choose what the truth is, determine my own reality based on the facts that are available. And
that is fucking the best I could. No one, somebody say that better. Like, please, somebody explain it better than that, because that is fucking fantastic. I think I need to. Oh, should have clipped that. Fucking just perfectly said by Abby, because that's why I listen to her. She is reasonable, she's intelligent, and she does great reporting, great journalism, great investigative journalism. And we can't say that about news anchors on CNN or MSNBC. She does something that they won't do, they can't do, and we have to acknowledge that.
That's why this is so offensive. That's why this is such an extreme measure. Because at the same time, you see all these corporate news anchors bemoaning censorship in Russia. And while that may be true, And that is horrible what Russia's doing to shut down independent media. Why are we doing it too?
Right.
Why are we limiting and actually purging Russian media that, of course, it doesn't just host Russian talking points. This is one of the only networks that actually uplifted marginalized voices, going back to the cynical exploitation and covering the void that's lacking by the corporate media. RT America was an incredible opportunity to highlight voices like Chris Hedges, consistent anti-war voices like myself, Lee Camp. And that was unmatched. That platform that RT America gave us was unmatched. Our viewpoints are not allowed on the corporate media. Dissent against empire is not allowed on the corporate media. And that is why we had to go to places like Russia Today in order to have a platform for these very important and crucial perspectives. And so the shuttering of RT, this was, and if I may just say something really quickly about the DNI report. I mean, we saw this firsthand in what the DNI report said. We were told by the intelligence agencies that this 2017 report was supposed to be a conclusive indictment on Russian media. What it was instead was it wasn't about how RT promoted Russia and Putin. It was about that it covered forbidden viewpoints. So, for example, it pointed out my show, specifically Breaking the Set, which was on air for 3 years, ended 2 years before the Trump administration was elected. It talked about how I fomented radical discontent because I covered issues like third-party candidates, that I covered issues like fracking, like socialism. I mean, this is what they were really scared of. This is why they wanted to shun RT. And of course, in that huge wave of shunning all alternative media and blaming it for really the discontent, the real, very...
Like, mainstream media is so... The whole pushing mainstream media and being scared of information is so ridiculous. And, like, they're like, oh, there's too many people listening to them. We gotta shut them down because they're not spewing our talking points. It's... Like, I really feel like I gotta just go to Rumble pretty soon because it's the only one that's not censoring at the moment. And I don't know of another platform at the moment. Like, do we have to pray for a mass exodus? I feel like there might be a mass exodus if people keep getting censored right now. And if it gets to like close to election time and we're like looking at like none of your favorite people are on any platform because they're all getting censored out, we finally might see a mass exodus this election cycle. It's insane.
Real grievances that exist. They don't want those grievances shown or aired. They want to sanitize our reality and pretend that these viewpoints simply don't exist, because then it's easier to basically control the masses and manufacture consent for whatever they want to do. And Max, I think it's really crucial. I want the Russian perspective as we're heading into this potential standoff, a potential hot war with two nuclear armed powers. I want the Chinese perspective. I want the Iranian perspective. I want the Russian perspective. I'm not a child. All this does is constrict the already very severely limited parameters of debate on our airwaves. And I feel like we're not children. We can make up our own minds.
Man, I think that's very well and powerfully said. And I mean, there's so much there that I want to respond to. But I honestly think that, for viewers and listeners,
Abby, just drop that shit, yo.
It's a tough situation to be in, right? I mean, we need to kind of accept that as the starting point. There are no pure souls here. There are people who are committed to peace and justice and equality, doing the best with what we've got. You heard Abby mention that RT, yes, of course, cynically, for its own political purposes, had a vested interest in platforming voices that were not welcome on U.S. mainstream media. Yeah. But also think about what that actually means. Like, how could you say that Chris Hedges, or Abby Martin is a puppet of the Russian state? Chris Hedges was vilified for speaking out against the post 9/11 fury of war that we grew up in. And like that should be something that we should kind of sympathize with, and it should open up that space that Abby pointed to, that if the mainstream media has that sort of stranglehold on the contours of permissible debate in this country, and that limits our capacity to think and act in this world, to know in fact about the world that we are in, and to be guided towards certain ends with the limited knowledge that we have, the limited vision that we are given. that is very dangerous. That is how and why you see what we're seeing right now, which very much harkens back to those post 9/11 days. You know, Abby, I know that you and I were just a couple years apart in high school, and we grew up in similar areas, but like I feel like I didn't quite grasp then. And granted, I was a very conservative person who fully bought into the war, you know, furor after 9/11. But seeing it more as an adult now, it is very scary to recognize how quickly, right? The day before the Russian invasion began, we were focused on, you know, we were still talking about COVID-19 and the like government's opening up or restructuring of the CDC guidelines. We were talking about trans kids being attacked and vilified in Texas. We were talking about important labor struggles around the US and beyond. And suddenly it was like a Pavlovian bell had been rung. Everyone stopped, dropped everything. This became our primary focus. The media apparatus kind of just went right into full effect. And even I felt it in myself, right? I mean, like, and I was deeply uncomfortable with that because I feel like I'm a critical person, but just immediately I felt that sort of ideological conditioning just be activated at a moment's notice. I guess I wanted to ask before I move on to talking about your time at RT, just I guess what you feel that says about how much we may have or have not learned from what we saw in that sort of propagandistic effort, pro-war effort, that sort of cultural mania after 9/11. Have we come much farther from that now?
It's a really good point, and it's a very important
We haven't
comparison
gone for it at
because
all.
I similarly feel that way, Max. I I feel like our reptile brain was activated as peace loving people, as anti imperialists, as someone who has values that I hold very strongly that guide my principles and my actions. I mean, I have moral consistency. And so, of course, I'm horrified at what Russia did. And I think it's a criminal action. You know, I think that it should be widely condemned. But I think we all need to take a step back and then ask, after the horror subsides and through the fog of war, because it's very hard to determine what's going on the ground right now, is how did we get here? And it is so interesting to think back about 9/11 because that's really what it was formative for my political awakening and radicalization. And I think post 9/11 weeks and months and of course years, you can argue it never really ended, right? This mass conditioning, it was such a revealing time in how propaganda can really take hold of a society and essentially guide tens of millions of people who are completely terrified into supporting the hell that this government unleashed on the rest of the world for the last 2 decades. We were a country that was paralyzed with fear. We were driven by bloodlust and revenge. And since then, the news media further consolidated, further synchronized its messaging. I think Project Censored did this study showing how that 24-hour kind of broadcast was really perfected from 9/11. I think we saw like Anna Nicole Smith, and then 9/11 was like the next time that it was like 24/7. Let's just never stop showing the horror and destruction of these towers, you know, falling and all of this. And then it just never stopped. It's like, there is something to be said about that psychological control of like always having that beaten into your mind. And, you know, since that day, I mean, and it just further consolidated ever since then, where we saw, let's go back to the Trump administration. I mean, this algorithmic censorship that has further tightened its control over our airwaves. I mean, backpaging sources like the Real News. And now you have this media machinery that basically uniformly acts as one voice, whether it's on Fox News or CNN or whatever, when it comes to US foreign policy and our supposed friends and foes around the world. And you see a similar uniformity, just like you did with the Venezuela regime change efforts. You see a similar uniformity acting in reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, where it's the same resolve and hysterical browbeating, hand-wringing that we saw after 9/11, right? Well, we need to do something about this. What are we going to do about this? Of course, we're the world arbiter of morality and everything holy,
Of course.
even though there was no attack here. Russia didn't do anything to this country, but it's this climate we've fostered that we're the world's empire, that we have the duty and the right to, let's just say, collectively punish tens of millions of people in another country, strangle them, asphyxiate their economy, prevent them from doing anything. The bloodlust, it's sick. It's sick. It's so disturbing that people are just calling, clamoring for war and escalation. This is a nuclear armed power. Why is this happening? And so what you see is this kind of collective punishment to not just Russian oligarchs, but to all of its citizens. I mean, making boycotting Russians compulsory within a matter of days. And then, of course, you see big tech acting accordingly as well to basically crack down on anything that could be deemed a Russian media affiliate, anyone who's simply now bringing up the role of NATO, and the US government is now deemed a Putin apologist. It really does go back to the days of the demands of leftists who dared to oppose early on the invasion of Iraq, and of course Afghanistan, and subsequently Iraq, the demands to basically denounce Saddam Hussein, to denounce the Taliban. I mean, it's sad how little we've learned, but it's also very instructive of how we can move forward and try to avoid falling into the same disastrous pitfalls that we unfortunately did in a post 9/11 world. And I think first and foremost, it's acknowledging the role of our government. How did we get here? And pushing for peace and de-escalation, and that includes abolishing NATO, because that's a really strong force that has basically sowed the seeds and set the stage for everything that we're seeing today.
Well, and
Right.
that
That is fantastic. So yeah, just another wonderful discussion with Abby Martin. She does the Empire Files. She does all sorts of stuff. Oh, my boy was getting antsy. I came straight home and came right here, guys. It was a late night, so that was our intro for the night. Abby Martin discussion, and let's set this up for the last of the night. It's not on here yet. Okay, great. I just got home. Neighbors are pumping some music, and my dog is anxious, so we're gonna move on for all those reasons, and because we're all ADD, right? We all are ADD. This is from a couple days ago. Joey Biden announcing actions to continue to hold the Russians accountable. And I just love listening to Sleepy Joe, Stuttery Joe, no Biden. There's no
Sorry to
Biden.
keep you waiting. Just spoken for some time with President Zelensky of Ukraine. I told him, as I have each and every time we've spoken, the United States stands with the people of Ukraine and they bravely fight to defend their country. They are doing that. And as Putin continues his merciless assault, the United States and our allies and partners continue to work in lockstep to ramp up the economic pressures on Putin and to further isolate Russia on the global stage. Later today, together with other NATO allies in the G7, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, as well as the European Union, we're going to jointly announce several new steps to squeeze Putin and hold him even more accountable for his aggression against Ukraine.
Even more.
And I want to speak to a few of those points today. First, each of our nations is going to take steps to deny most favored nation status to Russia. A most favored nation status designation means two countries have agreed to trade with each other under the best possible terms. Low tariffs, few barriers of trade, and the highest possible imports allowed. In the United States, we call this permanent normal trade relations, PNTR, but it's the same thing. Revoking PNTR for Russia is going to make it harder for Russia to do business with the United States, and doing it in unison with other nations that make up half of the global economy will be another crushing blow to the Russian economy. It's already suffering very badly from our sanctions. And I want to thank Speaker Pelosi, Leader McCarthy, and Leader Schumer.
So you're gonna put pressure on average people and fuck over average people so that you can get Russia to do it what it wants? No, that doesn't. Sanctions don't fucking work. Sanctions are war, and they don't work.
And McConnell, and Senators Wyden and Crapo, Representatives Neal and Brady, for their bipartisan leadership on this in the Congress. I would like to offer a special thanks to Speaker Pelosi, who's been a strong advocate for revoking PNTR, and who agreed to hold off on that in the House until I could line up all of our key allies to keep us in complete unison. Unity among our allies is critically important, as you all know, from my perspective at least. Many issues divide us in Washington, but standing for democracy in Ukraine, pushing Russia's aggression, should not be one of those issues. The free world is coming together to confront Putin. Our two parties here at home are leading the way. And with that bipartisan cooperation, I'm looking forward to signing into law the bill revoking PNTR, which is, again, most people think of it as most favored nation status. We're also taking a further step of banning imports of goods from several signature sectors of the Russian economy, including seafood, vodka, and diamonds.
Wow, man. You really have to focus to listen to him. Like, it's just... I would say he's drunk. I just know that he's just old. Like, do we really think he's the leader? Man, the deep state is more evident every day. This is wild, guys. This is... Oh...
And we're going to continue to squeeze Putin. The G7 will seek to deny Russia the ability to borrow from leading multinational institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Putin is an aggressor. He is the aggressor. And Putin must pay the price. He cannot pursue a war that threatens the very foundations, which he's doing, the very foundations of international peace and stability, and then ask for financial help from the international community. The G7 is also stepping up pressure on corrupt Russian billionaires. We're adding new names to the list of oligarchs and their families that we're targeting. And we're increasing coordination among the G7 countries to target and capture their ill-begotten gains. They support Putin. They steal from the Russian people. And they seek to hide their money in our countries. They're part of that kleptocracy that exists in Moscow. And they must share in the pain of these sanctions. And while we're going after these their super yachts and their vacation homes and worth hundreds of millions of dollars, we're also going to make it harder for them to buy high-end products manufactured in our country. We're banning the export of luxury goods to Russia.
Is it mean to make fun of him, or do we have to accept that he's fucking losing it? I don't know. Like, I think it's mean to put him up there.
They're also the latest steps we're taking, but they're not the last steps we're going to take. And as I said, at the beginning of all these steps, we're going to hit Putin harder because the United States and our closest allies and partners are acting in unison. The totality of our sanctions and export controls is crushing the Russian economy. The ruble has lost more than half its value. They tell me it takes about 200 rubles to equal $1 these days. Moscow Stock Exchange has been closed for 2 weeks because they know the moment it opens, it will probably collapse. Credit rating agencies has downgraded Russia's government to junk.
He's having a hard time reading the fucking thing, man. Like, it's so hard to take him seriously. I feel bad, like, they're still propping him up, trying to speak. It's like, just hide him for a while. Let him sleep for a couple weeks. Maybe he'll come out on some Adderall and be better. I can't even pay attention to what the fuck he says, because it's bullshit, and he has no concept of what he's actually saying. Just no concept of all. Anyway, I did want to go. Tulsi had a little discussion about Kamala, and since Tulsi was the one that destroyed Kamala, absolutely just took her out on the debates and made her go from a prime candidate down to nothing. I thought we should check out what she has to say about Kamala's trip. It's funny to me. It's entertaining that Tulsi took down Kamala and she's still the VP, and now Tulsi is a Fox News paid coordinator or whatever the hell she is.
Embarrassing this country on the world stage yet again. Here with reaction to that, former Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi, if you had to grade the vice president, what would you grade her?
Is there anything worse than F on the grading scale? Sean, this would be humorous.
Seriously? YouTube getting me a commercial and there's a freaking 2-minute. I've already watched it.
If it weren't so dangerous. We have this person who is just a heartbeat away from the presidency. We look back, we know she was anointed by the mainstream media. She was appointed by the Clinton machine for 2 very simple reasons. Number 1 is identity politics. She had the right skin color and the right gender. And number 2, she had proven herself to be loyal to the power elite in Washington, the warmongers, the Clinton machine. And as a result, we are seeing now they send her to Poland, revealing the fact that they're not actually serious about solving this tragedy, this problem. We've seen how they are not serious about solving illegal immigration at our border because they put her in charge of solving that problem. It just proves this is all about. It's all about politics, Sean. It's about the Kamala Harris show, getting her out there, giving her the opportunity to get some photo ops with our troops, with refugees, things that can bolster her eventual run for the presidency, which is so sad because really this shows that the suffering of the Ukrainian people really are just they're actors in the Kamala Harris show. And this is why we're facing the problems we're facing, that it's all about them. They don't care about the people. If they did, they would be taking action to address this skyrocketing inflation that started before the Russian assault on Ukraine. They'd be taking action to address the fact that the American people are struggling to figure out, how do I pay for filling up a gas tank as well as groceries or things for my kids? They'd be addressing the real problems the American people are facing, but instead they're driven by their own political interests, their own political ambition, how they look in the media, and how they can get themselves ahead. This is the most heartbreaking.
That might be her shadow. She might be calling out her shadow right there. I have to, as somebody who was a fan, this is actually a, here, oh fuck, you're right on my ass, dude. This is a fuck that Tulsi Gabbard t-shirt. So, yeah, I was a fan. And now I have to question everything she says because she's proven herself not 100% trustworthy with the vote for Pelosi as one of her last votes. Just only on Fox News nowadays. I don't know if she's a paid contributor or if she's looking for. I've heard a few people try to say that she might be trying to run for governor of her state. I don't know what she's doing.
Thing about what we're seeing play out before us.
You know, I think you're displaying the emotion that many Americans feel. It is heartbreaking to see America on the world stage represented both by the president and vice president this way. I think maybe in retrospect, if we went back to the primary, people would look at you a lot differently knowing what we know now.
No, I mean, it was the press that blasted her. Fox News has only started being nice to her now that she's not running for anything. If she is running for a Democratic seat right now, they wouldn't be fucking bringing her on every day. That's for sure. You could pretend that's not a thing, but that's the way of the life goes. That's funny. All right, let's work into our North Carolina Senate takedown with a couple more clips, and then we'll talk about the North Carolina Senate race. But first, let's go to the gray zone.
Hi, my name is Annie, and I would like...
Let's go to a commercial. That sounds fun. So this is going to be the gray zone. Congress screws workers to escalate war on Russia. Just another way our Congress, our Senate, our elected officials are not doing that of the electorals. They don't care about us at all.
On March 8th, as the Russian military operation inside Ukraine expanded, President Joseph Biden announced a total ban on Russian oil to the United States, sending oil prices to record highs.
Today, I'm announcing the United States is targeting the main artery of Russia's economy. We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy. That means Russian oil will no longer be acceptable in U.S. ports, and the American people will deal another powerful blow to Putin's war machine.
Powerful blow.
Following Biden's
All these
announcement,
powerful blows
his
we're
allies in
giving
the
to Putin.
media spread the message that
So
higher
powerful.
gas and food prices and rising inflation was a price that Americans simply had to pay to put the hurt on Putin.
Ultimately, if the price of combating tyranny is a period of much higher gas prices, that's a price we need to be prepared to pay as a country.
Who's going to stop our tyranny? Like, I'm not trying to be a dick and all, but I think as a good leap of faith, we should end all sanctions everywhere else, maybe. Every other country say, we're going to end all sanctions everywhere but Russia and tell Russia to back off. That would really show them. Ending sanctions on Cuba, ending sanctions on Venezuela, ending sanctions on North Korea, ending sanctions on, let's see here, Somalia, Libya, Syria. It's all the ones I know of. Ecuador, Peru. Shit. There's more. End all sanctions.
Today, the average gas price in America hit an all-time record high of over $4 per
This
gallon.
is not me
Okay,
saying this.
that stings, but a clean conscience is worth $1 or $2. I'm willing to pay.
Yeah, this is garbage, guys. Really, seriously, though. I'm willing to pay $1 or $2 for ending
On
tyranny.
Capitol Hill,
We're
where Congress was set to vote on a gigantic emergency package
be a
of
full
arms
platform.
to Ukraine and NATO, I questioned lawmakers on the economic price to working-class Americans of a major military escalation.
I think that he did well in banning Russian oil. I think that would be nefarious and pernicious and really bad for the Venezuelan people and its future as a free country to start dealing with Maduro, even to buy shoes from him, purses, whatever this has nothing to do with oil. It has to do with engaging with another dictator.
Yeah, and
Human rights is across the board.
and do you support it?
Oh, and his follow-up is going to be so good. Max, I get along with 80% of the time or so, whatever. Doesn't, I don't know him. I've never met the guy. I'm just saying his political opinions, some stuff he's a little aggressive, some stuff he nails, but he nails her. This is fantastic.
A no-fly zone in Ukraine?
I support everything that has to do with punishing Vladimir Putin and helping the Ukrainians.
Oh, yeah?
Wouldn't that mean direct conventional warfare with Russia?
I don't know what it will mean, but freedom is not free.
So you don't know what a no-fly zone will mean. If you would have to shoot down Russian planes, I mean.
Of course.
So conventional war with Russia.
Listen, thank you.
Hi, Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone. I was just wondering what you thought of the Russian oil ban.
I support the ban on oil.
So do you think that working class Americans should pay more to escalate the cost against Russia?
No, I think we need to ban the oil from Russia, and we need to reduce gas prices in this country. And the way we reduce gas prices is to say to the big oil companies.
So that's Ro Khanna. Side note on Ro Khanna, we don't need to look him up because I already know. He, I don't know for sure. I believe he's good on most issues. Where he falls short is that his wife is a multi-millionaire, meaning worth more than 10 million, and she's mostly invested in like cybersecurity. So they're very bad on like internet rights and stopping any of that kind of stuff. But everything else he's great on because he doesn't have all of his money invested in that.
You can't be making billions of profits while gouging people at the pump.
I mean, prices are already going up massively because of the sanctions, inflation's going up, and that's all to fight Russia. I mean, that's the message Biden and his people are sending. Don't you think? I mean, do you think Americans? What skin in the game do Americans have for Ukraine?
Americans have the skin in the game to stand up for freedom, to stand up for human rights. We've always done that as a nation, and we want to make sure that we stand up for Europe and NATO, and we stand up to bullies. I mean, people see on television Putin killing children, killing mothers. I mean, it's horrific. And we as an America, we are the greatest nation in the world. We've always stood up for freedom. We stand up for human rights.
So raising inflation and raising oil prices for freedom.
I don't think that's connected. I think the reason that people are paying $5 at the pump and $6 at the pump is because these big oil companies are profiting billions of dollars. Why is it that they're putting the billions of dollars, because the price of oil is going up, why do they put that in with their stockholders with stock buybacks? Make sure that they are being taxed if they're fleecing the American public, and lower the gas prices. That's what we need to do.
Right, and you kind of ran on an anti-war peace platform. You're part of the Progressive Caucus. Do you support all the foreign fighters and weapons being sent into Ukraine, sending them aircraft, Stinger missiles, calling for an insurgency?
I was opposed to the war in Iraq because that was an unjust war. I had supported the strike in Afghanistan because those were terrorists, and I was opposed then to the long years in Afghanistan. But I think that this is a just war that the Ukrainians...
So shipping more weapons and escalate.
Well, we're making sure that they are armed to be able to fight that, and the Congress is going to pass $10 billion, and I support them, their ability to stand for self-determination.
So there's the virtue signaling kind of sanctions that Biden and some private companies have undertaken. And then there are the crippling sanctions. Okay, but who are they crippling? They're not crippling Putin per se. He'll find a market for his oil. They're crippling the people here in this country. First of all, we're going to see higher prices. The low-income people are being pinched the most by inflation. We've got gasoline is about to go to $5 a gallon at the pump, and it's not going to stop there. So, and there are lots of other things we bring from Russia, like fertilizer, over $1 billion. Try not putting $1 billion of fertilizer on the fields in America this year and see what that does to food prices and supply chain issues. So if you think all of these things through, there's two kinds of sanctions. The sanctions that would cripple Russia, but it would cripple us as well. It's kind of mutually assured sanctions, economic devastation. If he does, in fact, sanction Russia, we'll see higher energy prices. But look, that's going to go into the global supply of oil. Somebody else is going to buy that. It may, in fact, end up here after it changes hands. It's not really going to reduce how much oil that Russia sells, at least not in the medium to long term.
But what is your sense inside that building? Are we edging closer to a conventional conflict with a nuclear armed power in Russia?
Well, I hope we're not edging closer, but there's a vote to send more money to Ukraine and to our NATO allies, in fact, to finance troops in Eastern Europe. Two things can't simultaneously be true. The news reports that are coming back would lead you to believe that Russia's getting crushed. They're being devastated by Ukraine and Ukraine alone. It can't be a fact that Russia's a paper tiger and they're being destroyed by Ukrainian army and National Guard. And at the same time, we need to send billions of dollars more in weapons and troops to NATO.
Are you able to form any coalition or partnership with the progressives in Congress against escalating this war? Ilhan Omar just came out against, I believe, the Russian oil ban.
I would have hoped to get some to vote against that resolution, but we didn't get any. I thought that the true progressives were against war, and I have formed coalitions with them in the past in opposing the war in Afghanistan, for instance, and getting that to come to an end. I haven't seen it yet. I don't know when we'll see it. I have seen them become strong supporters of the right to keep and bear arms, though, in Ukraine at least. So I'm encouraged by that coalition.
Yeah, great. Love the coalition to give arms to the Ukrainians. I'm for them defending themselves. I'm not for giving them Stinger missiles so that they can cause more death from long range. It's a messed up world, guys, and I'm not saying I understand it all the way, but this is my perspective, and here we are late night trying it out, huh? Let's move on. So, this is a... hold on. It was a, it's NBC News, local news associate. So this is from an NBC local news. This is not my broadcasting. Hopefully they can actually let me play this. And this is a congressional candidate Martin Hype threatening cops. You know who I am? Anyhow, I just want to remind us all who, and this is from a couple weeks ago, like 3 weeks, but just want to remind you what kind of people run for our House and Senate.
Hey, how you doing?
How you doing, sir? I'm Sebastian, Sarasota Police Department. You're on audio and video recording. The reason for the stop, you were observed going 57 and a 40, and you were on your phone texting while you were doing that. That was at Euclid and Fruitville.
You don't need to point at me, officer.
I'm not pointing at you. I'm pointing in the direction where it was.
I just called the chief. How's that?
Go right ahead, sir. Can I see
know
your
who I
license?
am, right?
Yes, sir, I do. Can I see your license, registration, insurance, please?
You can do this?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry? I still have a job to do, sir.
Yeah, what's your name?
Officer Veskin, it's going to be on the citation. Can I see your insurance, registration, and your license, please? Sir, can I have your paperwork, please? 7 years, sir. Can I see your registration, please? You're not going to give me your registration, sir. I'm asking you if you're going to produce me with your registration. You don't have it on you?
What a dick.
Go call chief. Tell him how rude you just been to me. Play with this video.
Okay.
Then you call Marlon Brown. Then you call the mayor.
Okay.
They're not okay, darling. Tell me what to do.
Okay, sir. Are you refusing to produce your registration? I'm asking you if you have your registration.
You're making career decisions.
Okay,
Why
sir.
are you doing this?
Sir, because you were speeding and you were texting.
Says who? Where's your video?
All right. Hang tight.
Call the supervisor. I just spoke to your boss.
Okay.
That's not okay.
You want your paperwork?
Is it your Russian immigrant status that makes you talk to people like this?
10-14-6.
Call the supervisor.
14 dispatch, can you have my supervisor respond, please?
Yeah. And then we'll see who goes.
Okay. You don't want your paperwork?
6142, you don't have a warrant.
Sir, you're going to be
I'm not
issued a
interested in
citation.
anything you have to say. I'll wait for the supervisor.
You can wait for the supervisor, but I'm going to go through what I need to go through.
No, I'm not interested.
All right, you are going to be issued a
There's
citation.
the registration.
Well, you've been already issued a citation for that.
For what?
For failure to produce your registration. All right.
You
Sir,
look
you're going to be issued a
here.
citation 57 and a 40 for speeding. Your fine is $256. Information in the back. You're going to have an option to plead guilty, an option to plead not guilty, and an option to take a safe driver's course. If you qualify for the course, it will reduce your fine, and it will reduce your points. If you decide to go ahead and do that, just make sure you do it prior to submission of payment.
You know what he said about you? You want to hear what he said about you?
He could say all he wants about me. I got a job to do, sir.
You know what he said about you?
If you
He said
fail
he's
to
had you
complete...
before like this.
Okay.
And he's going to have you again.
And that's fine.
It's not fine. Why do you keep saying it's fine?
Sir?
I'm a law-abiding citizen, and you're being bloody rude to me.
If you decide to go ahead and do the course, just make sure you do it prior to submission of payment, as they do.
He said something about her Russian immigration status, and he's got a fucking English accent, and he's speaking with fucking English tones. So he's British, and he's giving her shit about her fucking immigration.
Require a certificate of completion. If you sign up for it, you must complete it, otherwise they will go ahead and suspend your license. You are going to be issued a citation for texting and driving. Okay? You are going to be issued a citation for texting and driving. Your fine is $116. Information in the back. You're going to have an option to plead guilty and an option to plead not guilty. You are going to be issued a citation for failure to provide your registration upon request. Your fine is $116. Information in the back. You can plead guilty or not guilty.
You're lying.
You're lying? No, dude, you're a dick.
Green paper.
Give him the citation.
You're a
Green
massive
paper
dick.
tells you you have 30 days to replay.
Why are you lying?
You have 30 days
Why
to
are you
reply.
lying?
Your payment options are on the green form.
Here's a simple question. Why are you lying?
Phone number on the bottom in
When your
case you have any
supervisor
questions. When my supervisor comes, I'll wait for him with you if you like me to. Your citations are over here. You can accept them. I will wait. I will wait, but I will wait in my car. There you go.
You have the bad.
What a massive dickhead.
Sir, step back into your car or stand on the sidewalk so you don't get hit by a vehicle. It's for your safety. 14 right here. Can I have another unit respond? Sir, stand over there. It's for my safety and for your
It's like a car
safety.
wreck to me. I mean, if you guys
Sir?
hate it, tell me, but this is fucking hilarious. This guy's a massive
10-4, the
dick.
driver being extremely uncooperative.
Massive dick. What is your problem, dude? I'm not for cops. I don't like cops. But he was a dick right off the bat, and fucking congressman, man.
Yes, Arch.
Cops and congressmen. Who's worse?
6142 to 6715. Are you anywhere close?
I can't. He won't let me leave until a supervisor shows up. Martin Hyde. I just gave him 3 tickets. Yes. Bye. Speeding, 57 and a 40, texting while driving, and failure to produce his registration because he told me I could look it up. And he's gonna have my job. Everything is on camera.
He's a massive dick. Oh man, that guy was a jerk. Alright. I don't think we need to watch him come back. That was just oh man, he was most disagreeable. I kind of want to see what happens. I don't know. He's a dick. That's for sure. That was. This is all from a local news station. They played this whole thing, or did they leak the whole thing? I don't know. 10 million views. How
Are you
did I
still
not
waiting
see
for a
this?
supervisor, or are you leaving?
10 million views.
Okay.
I didn't fucking
Very
see
good.
this. Oh, it's great.
I'm sorry? Okay.
You know Pat Robertson, right?
Yes, I do, sir.
Why are you doing it?
Because I have a job to do, sir. Nobody's above the law.
No one's above the law. You have to have some degree of respect for law-abiding.
That degree of respect started the moment I walked up to your car, sir.
No. You knew exactly what you were doing and you made a mistake.
If that is your feeling, you are more than welcome to fight the citations in court.
I'll fight the citation. I'll fight your employment.
Okay. You're more than, you know, you're an influential person. You're
very.
You can go ahead and do that.
You're a British prick.
Okay.
Why not just say you're sorry?
Because I did nothing wrong, sir. I was doing my job, but I am going to ask you either to sit in your car or step on the sidewalk because I don't want either one of us getting hit. Okay. Sir, I have nothing more to say to you, sir. You requested my supervisor. You can have the conversation with them now.
You're a massive dick, dude. Like, you just, like, as soon as she walked up to the car, he was like, you know who I am?
Sarge Frangione is on his way.
Sarasota, fucking
Speeding,
hell. Of course
57
it's
and a
fucking
40.
Florida.
Texting while driving, failure to produce his registration when I asked. He told me I could look it up.
Okay. You know who he is,
Yes.
right? Yeah, you might identify him.
Yes.
Okay. So you're just gonna stay by to cite him, or is that what?
He already got cited.
Oh, he has already
Yeah.
the citation. So you just.
From the moment I woke up.
So you're just waiting for.
He's waiting for supervisor, and I guess he spoke to Frangione, so Frangione is on his way.
He's waiting
Bobby
for
just pulled up.
he's waiting for the supervisor. 'Cause he wants a
Hello?
manager. He's being very
Mr.
Karen
Hyde?
at the moment.
I guess you talked to Sergeant Frangione by the phone?
I did, yeah.
Okay, he's on his way. She requested another unit, so that's what
How do
another
you give
unit.
someone a certificate, ticket for no registration when they've got their registration?
Because you refused to give it, you prick.
She's trying to make her spurs, but it's a big mistake.
Well, this one is the expired one, but
Well, that doesn't make it. It'll take 2 seconds.
yeah.
we're going to make sure that she pays the price for being disrespectful.
Dude, what a dick.
I just wanted you to witness and know that, the registration was right there, and she deliberately chose to write the ticket. She came up, she said, look, there's a video of it, so be quiet. There's a video of what you said.
There is.
And I've got a video of what you said. Right? What she said was, I said, I don't have it. She immediately said, I write your citation. She went right back. She never said anything. She went straight back. I denied the citation. She's straight back, right the
Dude, we watched the fucking video, you
25
dumbass.
years. I've represented your unit. I've got no interest in listening to you, young lady.
I was talking to my sergeant. Sergeant, if you don't mind if we could step over the road onto the sidewalk.
Yeah, just a second, officer.
Come on then.
Yeah, Mr. Hyde, like I said,
No.
you know,
I've represented you guys
Yes,
in
sir.
union discussions. My
Yeah.
son is a cop. I'm friends with
Yeah. Yes, sir.
everybody in the police department. This is the first time anybody has been disrespectful to me. And for what reason?
Going
I
20
could care
over.
less. If they were going to write me a ticket, I could care less. I just pay the bloody thing. You don't think I got the money? It's the manner and the nature of it.
Okay.
She wasn't that bad.
And like I said, Sergeant Vangione will be over here to talk to you about
you're a dick.
her interaction.
You've been a dick this whole time.
I'd say.
Outrageous. Yeah. Why would you do that? Why? I mean, of all the people to do it to.
Yeah, I understand, sir. And you know, I set you. You know, I've been with the negotiations with you, and I understand where you're coming from.
I don't ask for special treatment, but I don't expect to get treated like a punk.
Let me go talk to her and see.
Well, it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
She's got it in her head. I know exactly who she is. Frangione told me exactly who she is. That's fine. 7 years might not turn into 8.
This guy's a massive prick. Sarasota, Florida. Massive douchebag.
Do you need me to go back to the station and dock my camera?
No. He'll review it if he needs to review it. He can stop
Because
it.
Sarge was already calling me to do that. He just didn't know that this is who it was.
Oh, okay.
So, but I couldn't leave until somebody was here, so just let me know what you need me to do.
Is Sergeant Frangione coming on his way here? Is that
Yes.
He is.
Yes, he told me he was.
I just wait for him to get here, and then. Well, let me give him a call real quick, because that might help matters.
Want me here or anything?
No.
I smoked for like a year of my life, but I chewed for like 5 years.
Oh, so fucking cringe. So bad. Oh my god. Ugh. Alright. So that's the kind of people you're dealing with sometimes. Or a lot of the times. Especially when they're well influential. What a fucking asshole. Alright. So, I want to look at the North Carolina Senate race for a minute, guys. Do a little stony progressive takedown. We got primaries coming up. We got elections coming up. So let's take a look. North Carolina Senate seat, Bill Burr is stepping down. So he is currently retiring. His seat is being vacated. So you have many people coming after it. In the state of North Carolina, we have a few frontrunners. I looked up today, Jeff Jackson, the second highest grossing person, a Democrat. He spent $2.5 million on his campaign so far, and he dropped out just recently. So I don't know if that's holding up, if that was just a verbal dropout, if he's suspended and could reload, but he is currently out. So Sherry Beasley is the Democratic frontrunner with almost $5 million raised and only $2 million spent, over almost $3 million on hand. So she's ready to go after it, ready to go after it. And then on the Republican side, we have Ted Budd, who has raised the most funds, but just by a little bit over Pat McCrory. And the most recent polls, Pat McCrory seems to be the front runner. So I wanted to look at him. But they don't really have really well versed on non-incumbents. They don't have what they raised on like breakdownable. So I'll have to do some separate research, but I guarantee you, being again North Carolina, I can promise you a Democrat is going to be corporate and a Republican is going to be NRA. So let's just go ahead and pretend that's the case. So these are the two front runners of the two majority parties. Now we do have, in this state, we have Shannon Bray as the Libertarian Party and Matthew Ho, which is for the Green Party. So we do have two independent parties. Matthew Ho being a vet, so Green Party and a vet, that's usually my angle if you're progressive. But let's go ahead and look at these garbage two-party system candidates. This is Pat McElroy, the front runner currently for the Republicans.
Local matters. Every week on CBS 17 News at 4, Russ Bowen sits down with state and local leaders to talk about issues that are impacting our communities. And Russ, you had a chance today to talk to former Governor Pat McCrory, who's in a real battle.
Oh, you can say it. All you got to do is catch an ad or two, and you can see the Republican primary for North Carolina's open U.S. Senate seat is very, very contentious. Putting that part aside, there are some real issues that Americans are dealing with, including that crisis in Ukraine. I asked Pat McCrory to respond to the politicians who have praised Vladimir Putin in the past and more recently.
What?
The danger of even saying some things that may be accurate is that those things that anyone says out of the United States can be used as propaganda against us in Russia. We've got to recognize that the people of Russia are not hearing the full story. They're being
So he lost, he was our governor, he lost the governorship to a Democrat, and now he's running after the Senate seat, since he lost the governorship to a Democrat. Oh, what a tool bag. He was the governor when I first moved to North Carolina. He's a tool.
Pressed with propaganda only coming from Putin. And
like he essentially tried to screw, like he was the one, what'd he do? He tried to screw over Charlotte for like, what was it? I can't remember. Like he tried to screw over the city of Charlotte for doing something, and it was like basically like these fucking. I'll have to look. Oh my God, what'd he do?
The likelihood of anything that's said by current or past officials will be used against us with the people of Russia, and we've got to convey to the people of Russia that we have nothing against them personally, but your leader is doing something that's putting our world security at risk.
One of the things that seems to have caught Putin a little bit off guard, at least, is the transparency that the United States has had when it comes to revealing what we know, satellite pictures, where the buildup is, where these locations of these troops are.
The only danger that might be is that if Putin and his Russian forces start targeting the communication links that allow us to see the Russian troops.
Eyewitness video captured the moment a Russian missile struck a television tower in the capital, Kyiv, as a 40-mile Russian convoy remained stalled on the outskirts of the city.
And now they know what we're seeing, and the next step was, will there be an a ramping up of armed conflict, not just on the ground, but even in space.
Gasoline prices are setting a new record, and they're likely
to... He said also in space. Oh, I don't need any more. This is a 5-minute clip. I don't need any more of this guy. I remember him now. Pat McElroy. Please, if you're looking at the Senate races, ugh, gross. That was awful. All right, so this is Sherry Beasley. She's the Democratic frontrunner. Again, raised $3 million, has $2 million, or she's raised $5 million, still has $2 million on hand. She's got the most money of anybody in the races right now, which is not usually a good thing.
DNC Charlotte.
It's a good thing for them thinking that they're going to win, but it's not a good thing for her constituents at all.
This is Flashpoint.
Thanks for joining us here on Flashpoint. I'm Ben Thompson. According to recent census numbers, the face of North Carolina, the country for that matter, is changing. Here in Mecklenburg County, the Hispanic and Latino community, the fastest growing ethnic community. Meanwhile, black voters really proving to be powerful at the ballot box just in the last year. Take a look at this. 80% of black men supported Joe Biden, but an interesting statistic not enough people talk about. That's down slightly from Hillary Clinton's 82% in 2016, and a big drop from Obama's percent in 2008. And 87% in 2012. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we're going to speak to one Republican about how the GOP is trying to make some inroads with voters of color here in the Carolinas. But first, there are currently no black women in the U.S. Senate. 100 people, and not a single black woman. Today on Flashpoint, a woman hoping to change that. Former Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, Sherry Beasley. She's facing State Senator Jeff Jackson and former State Senator Erica Smith.
Again, Jeff Jackson, I guess, backed out recently. No, I have not confirmed that, but that was, I literally looked him up, and in Ballotpedia it showed it. So I'm going to take that as he's currently backed out.
The Democratic primary for that Senate seat. Over on the Republican side, the big names are U.S. Congressman Ted Budd, former North Carolina Governor, former Charlotte Mayor Pat McCrory, and former Congressman Mark Walker. Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate Sherry Beasley joining us today here on Flashpoint. Ms. Beasley, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ben.
So first of all, I'll start with the softballs, okay? Why are you running?
You know, I have served as a judge for 22 years and fully understand that it is so important to have someone there who understands the importance of justice. And I have received justice when I went to law school, when I became a judge, and I am pursuing justice now as a candidate for the United States Senate. You know, I'm a working mom and I've been a judge, and I know that there have been so many times when laws made in Washington have failed the people of North Carolina. We really need someone in the United States Senate who represents the people of North Carolina, who understands the impact that these laws have on people's everyday lives. And I'm excited about folks understanding that this election is not just about today. It's really about making sure that we have laid a foundation for the success of generations to come, the children who are not even born. And so I want the people here in North Carolina to know that there's an opportunity to have someone who's different, who has a wealth of experience in shaping and creating policy and understanding the impact of law, who has worked so hard to defend and uplift justice and people across the state of North Carolina. And that's why I'm running for the United States Senate.
I don't need to tell you that the lack of women of color in the U.S. Senate is stark. Your own race aside, how important is it to you that we get a U.S. Senate that reflects more of the American people?
You know, I am certainly very aware that there are only 24 women.
Wow, did he just set that up for her? What the hell kind of... All right, I can't. That's not... Wow. Again, she has the most money of anybody in the Senate race, and usually your front runner of her first Senate race, she has over $5 million. That is not a good sign for her constituents. That means she's raised a lot of money, and that style of fast money raising is not going to leave way for like average people to talk to her. She's going to be pretty much owned by her well-off constituents, not her everyday constituents. So I'm going to go ahead and put her as a corporate Democrat. And again, you do have other choices. The Main Street media is going to say, you know, here's your Republican, here's your Democrat. That's all you have. Good luck, state of North Carolina. But the truth is that North Carolina has progressive cities and it has open thought cities. So like, you know, places like Charlotte, places like Asheville, places like Greensboro, these are progressive cities possibly to, you know, vote in a green candidate like Matthew Ho. And you have rural cities that are possibly moving out of just a straight Republican, and maybe that Libertarian has a better chance. So, yeah, don't just think that the two-party system is the only way for North Carolina to move forward. It is not. And I think that it'll be a really good opportunity for us to show the country right there that is two corporate-owned politicians that we don't need going any further. Let's move back to some interviews. This one I wanted to look at.
I discovered the
nice commercial. Wonderful stuff. All right, this is David Pakman going over an interview, which, you know, seems a little redundant. You know, reviewing somebody reviewing an interview is a little bit counterintuitive, redundant, reductive, completely. I don't know. Doesn't matter. That's the kind of show I do. I I'm not going to give that other person a view. I'll give David Pacman a view, I guess. That's not the worst thing I've done all day. The worst thing I did was go to work. And start sounding like this. So let's check out some David Pacman. We don't need to watch the commercial to give him the money. He's got plenty enough subscribers and such.
Go to the much.
But this is going to be his review of a recent Donald Trump review. So we got Donald Trump, we got David Pacman, we got all sorts of stimuli.
Requested. Oh wait, this wasn't it. That's some kind of UFC thing. Wait a second. Where is this? Masvidal. No, hold on. Someone emailed it to me.
We get to
There's
watch him
another
figure out what he's
Trump
doing.
interview
That
here
makes me feel better.
that we wanted to look at. Here it is. Let's see what this.
This is a make fun of Donald and Sam Collins. I have not checked him out, so Bisky, I will throw him on the list for tomorrow, because Monday is usually when I check out people new for the first time. And I have
Is that true? Trump had weapons
a small slate for tomorrow, but
I understand they put in hardwood floor.
I am going to look him up right now and put him on the ballot for tomorrow.
You know how you're not going to use them by having them.
This
You
is
didn't have
usually
them, we would have big problems. Right. But we have them. But
when
Biden shouldn't
I
be
look
talking when
up
he's talking,
new people.
because he's playing right into
And
he's playing right into Putin's hands. Putin, I've never
yeah,
heard
this is
from a
over
leader
half of
outside
this, so
Kremlin,
we're
I
about
guess,
done
to
with
a
Trump
large extent.
too.
But Putin now talks about his nuclear capability.
That's just a
all the time.
standard
He
procedure.
said, this is you do or the no-fly zone, you do this.
That's
We're
as
a
long as I
nuclear
can
country.
handle him today.
And Biden's saying they're a nuclear country.
Mm-hmm.
It's so weak. It's sending such a bad
Would you have a no-fly
But I have
zone?
to say this:
Down.
The bombing of these cities
And move on to
indiscriminately,
the
the
last
bombing of these cities.
Lee Camp, welcome to the show.
Short segment. But again, I'll be doing Lee Camp every day. And that is because his show, New Crush. Yeah, so Lee Camp has been canceled and deleted, so we'll be checking in on him. And George Galloway is a good way to do it. I haven't checked him out in a while. I didn't know he was independent now. He used to do a few shows on a few independent sites, but let's give those guys a view.
Lee, I'm extremely sorry
Abuse of the
about
First
what's
Amendment.
happened. I know it's not the end for you, and we'll
hope
discuss
so.
where people can still watch you. But how did all this happen, and how did you feel when you got the news?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of shocking how quick it's been, how quickly it happened. In the span of 3 days, I lost my TV show. The videos on YouTube of Redacted Tonight are banned across the EU and Europe. And my personal podcast, Moment of Clarity, was deleted from Spotify. And, of course, it wasn't just my show. RT America shut down in the span of a few hours. And it was shocking. I think that it had to be either sanctions that made it impossible to operate, or the U.S. Justice Department telling them to stop, or something very sudden. You know, it was not just we're getting some backlash kind of shutdown. It was something very sudden, and it's sad to see this level of censorship. You know, the Americans pride themselves on this freedom of speech, freedom of press, and it has become clear over the past few days just how aggressively that is not true.
Well, you've led me, segued perfectly into what was my next question. You're supposed to be the land of the free. You're one of the only countries in the world where the First Amendment guarantees your right to free speech. What about all that?
Yeah, well, you know, you got to look into the fine print. The devil's in the details. We are the land of the free, and we also have the most prisoners in the world. We are the land of a prison state. So you can see how false that is. And if it's not just RT America, it is anti-war voices, anti-imperialist voices have been suppressed and crushed on most social media platforms. You know, my stuff has been shadow banned on Facebook for years now. And to me, it shows how much the U.S. corporate government, which they are basically owned by corporations, how much they can't handle any kind of truth that are outside a very tiny Overton window, a very tiny window of allowable thought, which is on your mainstream media.
Well, you've always been a candle in the dark, and now it's been snuffed out on the big platforms. But this is 2022. It's not 1952. It's not even 2002. People can still watch you to get your take on events and actually get a terrifically good laugh while doing it.
Yes, patreon.com/LeeCamp I've created. I'm still on YouTube. I still have LeeCamp.com.
You're on YouTube,
and
but only in the U.S.
Right. Well, yeah, that's true. Redacted Tonight is banned in other countries.
So redacted is redacted is redacted.
Exactly. I mean, what a way for a show to go out after 8 years is to actually have Redacted Tonight be redacted. I guess there's no way I'd prefer for it to happen, but it is sad to see it go. You know, I poured my heart and soul into that show. I had immense freedom. I wrote every word I ever said myself. I never was told what to say or how to say it or anything, and I doubt I'll ever see that from another network program again.
Never.
But like you said, I'm still out there on Patreon and on Twitter, so I will continue.
You'll have to go on the boards, although the way things are going, and we saw it in Canada recently, that if you protest or take a view that the state doesn't like, you could end up actually getting your bank account frozen. You could end up getting your pets taken in Canada. How long before they start to say you can't book a theatre?
Yeah,
right?
It's coming. I mean, I had said about you're referring to the trucker protest in Canada. You don't have to agree with what the truckers stand for, what they're saying. What happened is very dangerous. To just freeze the bank accounts of any kind of activist, nonviolent activist that's protesting something. What is to stop them from doing that against environmentalists, against pipeline protesters? It is just one step.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on
and
right now.
it will be happening. So I think people should be terrified with the way things are going. And cross-platform censorship, like I've seen in the past week, means there is a conspiracy afoot. They are conspiring. Like organization, I mean, companies have to get together and decide simultaneously that they're silencing these voices. It's very dangerous.
And what's been the reaction from other comedians, other people in show? I mean, Joe Rogan, that Spotify tried to, they tried to defend him. They resisted the siren calls from 1960s hippies to drive him off the air. In the end, Spotify backed down with him. Have you had any support from your peers?
I mean, there are some great examples of people that have supported me, like Abby Martin and Ben Norton and so many great journalists out there. But in terms of just regular comedians that are incredibly well known, no, not at all. I don't hear from them. I haven't heard from them in several years because apparently when you're anti-imperialist and anti-corporate America, you're a leper. And I have not gotten much support from those big name comics. Joe Rogan has been supportive in the past. I don't even know that he's avoiding supporting me. But most of them have no interest in touching something like this.
Well, of course, Francis Bacon said that self-censorship was the arrow that flies in the night. People will self-censor themselves from supporting you in case they're next.
Yeah, I think that is a big factor at play here is they don't want to risk their political capital, their online clout, as it were, to stand up for someone who has, turned into a pariah of the state. And again, it's not just me. This is anybody who is at RT America. This is anybody who is strongly anti-war in this time where you're supposed to just, fall for the jingoist wave and just start frothing at the mouth to send more weapons. You really are, you're anathema to the public discourse when you're speaking out against war.
This recalls to me a great movie I saw called Trumbo, which talked of the McCarthyite period where people like you actually had to move to Europe, and when they stayed in the United States, they had to adopt false names. The script of Spartacus itself was written by a man who couldn't reveal himself because he'd been blacklisted and banned in the wave of McCarthyism in the 1950s. Is that what we're approaching now?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities. There really are. Having to, Trumbo had to be behind the scenes. And this didn't have to do with McCarthyism, but it had to do with the state chasing him. Was Lenny Bruce, famous comedian, was speaking out against the state, speaking out against religion, things that were not generally accepted on stage. And he was basically driven to his death by the FBI. I mean, they hounded him and arrested him at every chance they got, and he couldn't make a living. And then he ultimately OD'd. And we saw his life, or people saw his life crumble because of the attacks of the state. So just because you're a performer or an entertainer or a writer does not make you free of this level of harassment, this extensive harassment, if you aren't agreeing with the U.S. war machine.
But yeah.
An even greater man, Paul Robeson, of course, was effectively pushed out of public life, a man who had been a giant on Broadway and on the West End stage, who had been in Showboat, the screen superstar, a man who was the first black player to play professional football for Rutgers and so on. There's a long history of this kind of witch hunting.
Oh yeah, so many brilliant people have been in prison. Eugene Debs and Abby Hoffman was a great and hilarious political activist who was also kind of driven into hiding because of COINTELPRO, and his life was basically destroyed. It happens again and again. History seems cyclical, and if you look back, this is not new. When the U.S. needs rallying for war or rallying for their propaganda talking points, they will do everything they can to shut down the voices that speak out against it.
And all of this
Google Career Certificates provide online training for in-demand jobs.
Is cancer culture real? Interview with Virginia student and New York Times author Emma Camp. From Bad Faith, this is going to be Brianna Joe. Fucking hell. I don't want to say that. I think it's her. But it could be somebody else on the channel. But is cancer culture real? Yeah.
Maple Cocaine, who said, each day on Twitter, there is one main character. The goal is to never be it. I am joined today on Bad Faith Podcast by someone who was the main character this week, arguably, Emma Camp. She is a senior at UVA. Welcome to Bad Faith Podcast, Emma.
Thank you for having me.
So the reason you were the main character on Monday, at the very least, was because you published an article in the New York Times titled, "I came to college eager to debate. I found self-censorship instead." Start by telling us what you are arguing in this article, and then we'll get into some of the feedback.
So really what I'm trying to argue in this article is, yes, it is wonderful when universities have really good policies in favor of student free speech that protects student First Amendment rights. But when we don't have a culture that embraces free speech and good discourse, a lot of negative consequences follow. One of them is that students don't really learn, because when you are constantly afraid of being caught saying the wrong thing, what you are necessarily afraid of is thinking the wrong thing, right? And if you don't even let yourself consider lines of thought because you just might be convinced by them, that's ultimately detrimental to learning, which is what I, at the very least, hope college is there to do.
So let's get into this a little bit, because I think that some of the pushback was that the characterization of how people were responding to some of the more controversial ideas that a person might have on campus as kind of outsized, or not that you use this word necessarily, but cancellation, might be characterized by somebody else as simply disagreement, and that there's no guarantee when you raise an issue that is controversial or in a minority opinion that everyone is going to agree with you. Where do you draw the line between people saying, okay, Emma, you raised your point. You were free to do so. It's, it's a free country, but it happens to be the case that most people disagree with you. And it is uncomfortable for sure when most people disagree with you. But how is that a kind of provoking a kind of self-censorship? How is that silencing someone's voice, let's say, as opposed to just engaging in the very debate that you say that you're seeking out?
So I agree it is sometimes hard to draw the line, but a rule of thumb I like to think of is how social capital comes into play. So for example, when I think about public shaming, you get a lot of social capital by joining in, right? By dunking on someone. I think when there's a good conversation with good disagreement, that just really isn't a factor. You don't gain social points for taking a certain point or characterizing someone a certain way. I think it also somewhat goes without saying that, what is the quality of the disagreement that's happening, right? Saying, I think your point is wrong and here's why is very different from, say, like ad hominem. So that's kind of a way that I might look at that.
So ad hominems, I might agree, but part of, I think, what was going on here is that at least the examples that you included in this piece seem to be pretty de minimis. So, for example, the second paragraph here, hushed voices and anxious looks dictate so many conversations on campus at the University of Virginia. A friend lowers her voice to lament the ostracizing of a student who said something well-meaning but mildly offensive during a student club's diversity training. Another student shuts his bedroom door when I mention a lecture defending Thomas Jefferson from contemporary criticism. His roommate might hear us, he explains. So this idea that someone might lower their voice because they're having a conversation that they know is going to be spicy, or shutting their door to have a similarly spicy conversation. I certainly feel like I have been in that situation, right? But it's because I'm workshopping things that I don't necessarily know that I want out in public, not because it's a view that I hold that that I'm too scared to articulate, but because I know that it's something that is, the stakes are really high, that the implications of me feeling this way or that way are really significant. And I want to talk about it with someone who knows me and is willing to engage in the conversation in good faith before I broadcast it more broadly. Is that in and of itself an issue?
No, I mean, I don't think so, but I also don't think that's really the problem that I've identified and that I've experienced. What I've experienced is people saying, if someone overhears me saying this, I'll lose all my friends, right? Or people will be afraid to be seen being friendly with me because you kind of become this kind of there's this radiation around you. And so I think that's the broader issue, not, I think well-reasoned caution to broadcast certain opinions that are undercooked.
Can you give us an example? I think that might help, because maybe it is that I am just too long in the tooth and have been out of college too long and things have genuinely changed. I mean, what is the kind of thing that you feel like you've said or belief that you've held that have caused people to not want to be your friend anymore? And also, how have that manifested that desire not to be your friend anymore? Is it explicit?
Yeah, so I am somewhat cautious to get too much into my personal experience. And I think I guess I'll explain part of the reason why before I go on. I think part of it is that I do self-censor less than anyone else I know, frankly. I did provide a personal experience example for the piece because I was asked to, and I was happy to do so. But really, I don't hold back that often. And I feel like so much of the discourse around this piece has come down to like how we feel about Emma Camp, the person, how we feel about how she characterizes a personal experience. And if we think that specific example is insufficient, then kind of the broader point is illegitimate. And so I'm not saying that to dodge your question.
Well, what was that example? Let's talk about that example from the
right. Piece. Okay, yeah. So you're talking about the example in the feminist theory class. Yeah, so that happened 2.5 years ago. I basically, as I recall, we were discussing kind of two kind of opposed writings, one of which was talking about the practice of sati or suji, which is kind of ritual suicide for widows that was practiced in certain parts of India among certain social classes in India, as far as I'm aware. And then someone essentially criticizing that piece for basically, as I recall, like making one culture kind of look bad, and then also making a problem out to be larger than it was. And what I remember saying at the time was something along the lines of, like, I think we should be able to say things are bad when they're obviously bad. Again, like, I am cautious to give too many, like, super factual statements about this because it happened a long time ago. But that's what I remember. And then I remember the conversation just kind of devolving from there and it becoming this, like, person after person after person, and kind of rigor of the pushback devolving quickly. But I think that's just one example among many, and frankly, a milder example among others.
What's interesting to me about that example is that what I suspect, and tell me if I'm wrong, having been in those kinds of situations, is that each person's perception of grievance is informed by how where they think the conversation is starting from, right? So we live in a society where, you know, we live in the West, and there are Western value systems and Western hegemony, whatever, however you want to characterize it. And from the vast majority of the country's history up until maybe 15, 20 years ago,
I call it the wheel.
I don't think so. What does it do?
It rolls.
Yeah, so does a bagel, okay? A bagel you can eat. One of the worst ideas I've ever heard.
Brother David, behold, the fork.
I got 10 forks right here, baby! Am I right?
Fuck. Goddamn commercials.
aspects of other cultures that are outside of that, even if they aren't good or bad, just different, are often shaded in a negative light, right? So there's a certain defensiveness about how we talk in a contemporary space. There's a certain defensiveness about how we talk about other people's cultural differences. Even if we would still maintain, you know, let's say female genital mutilation isn't for me. There's still a little bit of sensitivity about saying, well, people are coming from a different cultural context. We don't want to stigmatize groups that are already so stigmatized. They're not, you know, craven or savages or like personally inferior or any way for having this cultural practice. And there's plenty of cultural practices that we have that would probably seem quite, you know, backward from another perspective. And so let's just have that sense of like sensitivity, basically. And that a desire and a preference for that sensitivity is coming from a perspective that says, normally we just write off entire communities. Let's not do that again. Another person in a more immediate context, maybe a younger person, maybe someone who is not informed by a history of groups that have like not gotten a fair shake, might think, well, why are we tiptoeing around this thing that's so obviously bad? And I feel like that's where you're coming from. And I understand that, because if we are talking, I'm not familiar with the ritualized suicide you're talking about, but if we're talking about something like female genital mutilation, you know, I'm not a big fan. And I understand how it can be frustrating to have to deal with what feels like perhaps anachronistic sensitivities around something, when we all kind of get like, just to say female genital mutilation is bad isn't to say that certain cultures or groups of people are inherently inferior. Does that feel right?
Yeah, that totally makes sense, right? And I think that's an example of like really good faith criticism with the point I was trying to make. So I totally understand where you're coming from there.
Yeah, and then so the defensiveness is like, there's a group of people who very much feel like, I don't want to use the word victim, but they're fighting an uphill battle against all of Western hegemony. And they see someone like you come along and rightly or wrongly, you know, make assumptions about you, you know, that you're white, that, you know, I saw some comment on Twitter that said, oh, she lives on campus. I couldn't afford to live on campus. So that means that they're privileged. And I know that these categories get thrown around probably in an overly broad way that is not necessarily germane to what the person's life experiences actually are in every case. But can you understand how from some perspectives, it seems like all of a sudden, for the first time, there's some legitimate pushback against kind of a white hegemonic view of the world. And it seems like immediately that becomes a whole discourse about how things have gone, quote unquote, too far.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand where you're coming from. And I do think that is an example of like good faith pushback on that. And I do want to reiterate, like, I'm not necessarily upset with my classmates, right? Like, I understand why people have the perspectives that they do, even if I don't necessarily share them. I just wish that, say, like, the conversation in my class had gone more like this one, right? Where there was more incentive to give kind of good faith, but legitimate and, you know, worthy pushback on something rather than things kind of devolving. And especially, devolving in the way that they are incentivized to devolve online in particular, obviously, I think it's clear that people will say things to your face or won't say things to your face that they would say online.
What's so funny about this and what made me want to reach out in part is I was so frustrated by the pedagogical style in law school that I remember writing a final paper for a race law, and I forget what it's called, I don't know, class race, something, this class with Randall Kennedy, I took my 3L year. And in it, I basically archived every microaggression that I had observed in my 3 years at law school, some big, some small, and used a critical race legal scholar's writing, Derek Bell, to try to talk about the ways that legal pedagogy could be improved. Because my feeling was that so much of our legal system is informed by the racial context of the United States, but that racial context is not really taught in the classroom. So you're kind of abstractly talking about redlining, and you're abstractly talking about, restrictive land covenants and Native American land rights and poverty law and criminal law. And all of these things have this big, heavy background subtext that is not being articulated in the classroom. And it can undermine the pedagogy, and the teachers are not always, I think, sufficiently informed to have the kinds of conversations like the one you described that emerge that are very sensitive and upset students for different reasons on different sides of a kind of ideological aisle. But I agree, need to be had, but they need to be moderated by people who are equipped to do so. So I want you to tell me a little bit more about what the teacher said in this circumstance, because it seemed to me from your article, the way it was written, that the teacher almost tried to get past the conversation in a way that maybe was to even protect you and shield you from the pile-on. What would you like to have seen happen differently?
I mean, I think what I would like, so I think this also gets at another issue, which is that I think there's degrees where there's only so much kind of administrative forces can do. I think a lot of it is students themselves coming at things with slightly different attitudes. I mean, the way I perceived it is the teacher kind of wanted it to be over. I am, knowing all of the attention that's on me, I am really cautious of criticizing this professor too much. They are someone who I respect, even though I did end up talking about them vaguely in this. I don't want to end up putting them on blast because it would be easy to figure out who they are. And so I'm sorry, I know I'm dodging the question, but it's really out of concern for just not wanting to unnecessarily get someone a lot of criticism. And so I'm sorry for sort of dodging the question here.
No, are you sure that they wouldn't be interested in coming on and having this conversation?
I mean, I don't know, but I certainly don't want to be... But knowing that I'm possibly already the reason some people are getting a lot of flack, I don't want to be the reason an anonymous UVA professor is getting a lot of flack. But yeah, I think that professors can certainly find ways to kind of steer conversation toward more productive discussion and criticism. Yeah, I think it's a great way to kind of go about it.
I mean, I can't disagree with that because, again, I've pulled up my old article before I came on with you today, and I was like, oh, yeah, holy shit, I forgot all that stuff happened. There was a moment in a con law class where a professor, whom I liked generally, said something about how Karamatsu, the case that said that Japanese internment was constitutional, was kind of appropriate given the moment and given the fear and concerns around World War II, which is not how I look at history.
Yeah,
I don't think that, or there was another moment in a poverty law class where a classmate raised their hand and said, we were talking about basically redlining and, integration programs and what the state should do to undo what it had done in terms of redlining these neighborhoods. And he was making the point that because when Black people move into a neighborhood, the housing value declines because of racism, that white people who live next to Black people, or, when Black people move in because of some new policy that allows Black people to move into neighborhoods, white people should be compensated for the decline in their housing value because that is constructively a government taking, which is this principle that, if the government builds a highway through your neighborhood or something and diminishes the value of your land, it's like they took it and they have to compensate you for it, right? So these are the kinds of conversations that were happening all the time in my academic life. And I very much always felt like it wasn't like I was being protected by a liberal institution or anything. I always felt much farther to the left than both my classmates and my professors. And yet
Google Career Certificates provide online job training that's fast and flexible. Learn at your
Yeah, no, that's not a joke, and that kind of shit happens. The joke one, Rye would be the one that the freaking guy, like, there's a guy that, I don't know if he was on YouTube or on TikTok or whatever, but he would, like, there'd be a black person that would get arrested for something, and then he would do the same thing, like on video, saying, yep, see, I can do the same thing. It's, yeah, mostly gated community. Yeah, I mean, I can literally see that. There was one around Christmas too, where somebody was unloading a bunch of boxes out of their place into, and it was Christmas presents bought on like Black Friday or shit, and they got the police called on them. Was it in Florida? 'Cause no, you said Indiana, right? Gentrification, yeah, that's the
Burp
name of the
about it
game.
at a certain point.
All the
I
major
think
cities.
that some part of what people are objecting to is the idea that you have
make it unaffordable.
an access and platform to say your piece in the New York Times, but are also sort of positioning yourself as the one that's victimized in these scenarios. How do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, I think to your first point, the examples you bring up, which is, you know, kind of along the lines of like, why are we concerned about moderate to conservative? I don't consider myself a conservative, but I do frame conservatives as somewhat being attacked by this. You know, moderate liberal to conservative college students, you know, not having a good time in their discussions when real racism is happening. And to that I say, like, I also think racism is bad. Like, I don't think it is good that those things happened, right? Like,
Yeah, the devaluing property crap. I literally, oh my god, I don't even know how to take the, like, so I live in a nicer area of Clearwater, or whatever you want to say. So Clearwater area is a very big area, and there's a lot of side cities, and so some side cities are, you know, very poor, some side cities are very well off. And in my area, I had it was basically white when we moved here, and we've had some more ethnic people move in, and now I've seen a couple neighbors call the cops constantly. And you see them talking to the cops at 2-3 in the morning, having discussions with them about, oh, they're loud and they're doing this and they're doing that, and it's really gross when you see that. And it's oh my god, it's so constant. It's so constant. It's so bad.
I think we can walk and chew gum and kind of say, like, yes, obviously Black students having their professors say off the wall things like that is bad, right? And they shouldn't have to experience that. Of course they shouldn't. I think that is very much a problem as well. But I also think that this is also a problem. And I really, again, one of the unfortunate things about the response to this is how much it is focused on that, like, one little paragraph in which I give a bit of personal experience.
And it's always like when I'm getting done with the stream and walking the dog, and I'll see like a bunch of cops all over the place talking to people, and it's like they're just talking to freaking narky ass white people who are annoyed by people being loud late at night and shit. It's a big apartment complex. We're stacked on top of each other. You're gonna run into people at different hours. It's just gonna happen.
Because the fact of the matter is that I don't really think of myself as a victim in this, right? Like, I think I say what I think to be true a great deal in class. Like, I don't feel downtrodden per se. I wrote this more out of concern for other students. And so I suppose also to the point about, you know, having this access, you know, actually, could you repeat that? I'm starting to lose my train of thought a little bit.
Yeah, no, I was asking you a lot of things. I guess I'd like you to put just a finer point on it then of what is the grievance? Because you're saying that you're someone who is a more assertive, confident person who doesn't, you know, who is able to stand up to contrary opinion, right? And stand up to the crowds and say your piece. But there are others who feel like they aren't able to do so. You know, to what extent is the onus on an individual to kind of buck up and say what you're going to say. Because I will say, law school, I was a very shy, quiet person. But by 3 a year, I kind of felt compelled to start speaking up just because it felt like no one else in the class would. And a lot of people who are ideologically aligned with me, a lot of students of color, I would see murmuring and whispering and looking at each other in class, you know, making eye contact. I have an anecdote in that paper where a law and policy professor was asking, there was a conversation about policing, you know, why groups identify with police officers or not, or have a positive or negative feeling about police officers. And one student offered that when kids are young, they play cops and robbers. And maybe it's just that Black kids over-identify with robbers. I mean, these are the kind of conversations that we're having at Harvard Law School. Thank you very much. Never defer to a student because you think they went to a fancy law school and must be smart.
Oh, that is true. Yeah, I mean, it's levels, right? It's levels of shit at that level. It's hard.
But but no one said anything, right? No,
Right.
Not a single Black person said anything. We all looked at each other and we talked about it later in a study group, but nobody said anything. And eventually that burden got to me and I started speaking up in class more. Are we saying that we wish that professors, that there's some intermediary, like what should have happened there? What should have happened in your scenario in your gender studies class?
So I think what I'm saying is that I think in order to learn fully, you need to have access to more than one set of ideas, right? And that when a group of people that have something that goes outside of the mean, for whatever reason, legitimate or not, but I do think legitimate based on the sheer amount of social backlash that people are likely to get for pretty moderate things that they say, are fearful of speaking up and they don't speak up, that hurts everyone. And so what would I have rather had in this situation? What do I want people to do? I think for one, it starts with universities making their policies better. I think a lot of universities, most of them public, in fact, or most of them private, but a lot of public universities have formal policies that punish students for saying things that are protected by the First Amendment. A lot of universities, for example, have places you can go to report people for making microaggressions, which I think it really incentivizes like terrible ways of handling conflict.
Well, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Are people reporting each other for what kinds of microaggressions? What are we talking about here?
So at some schools, I believe Bryn Mawr might be one of them, but I don't know if they've changed that. I don't have that fact perfectly in my head. But so a lot of schools will have programs wherein they call them bias response teams, where basically if someone says or does something that not necessarily formal like harassment, like Davis standard harassment is different, something that makes you uncomfortable and makes you feel unsafe, that you perceive to be racist or sexist, homophobic, or so on, you can report them to an office for discipline. I think that really incentivizes a terrible way of having discourse and really incentivizes college students to flee to adults when problems arise. Second is universities taking firm stances in favor of freedom of expression. A way of doing that is that when
like a
student
abuse, right?
newspaper columnist gets canceled because of something they write and people are calling the Office of Admissions trying to get them expelled.
I remember, just such a different perspective of things. And I didn't graduate. I took more than enough credits probably to graduate with something, but I changed degrees a few times and didn't end up graduating. I just experienced, and I was told like by aunts and uncles and certain people, like going to college is more about going there and just having the discussions and having the debates with human beings that are from all different places and getting out of your hometown and meeting these people from all different areas. It was so much more about that. And if you're not allowing the discussion, if we're not actually discussing things on campus, if we're not getting into debates, if you're not stumbling all over yourself and embarrassing yourself and using words that you're not supposed to use because you don't fucking know the meaning yet, then you're not experiencing college. Then you're just experiencing high school at a second level.
The university doesn't listen, right? The university stands up in favor of the student no matter what their views are. So I think that's what universities can do. I think what students can do, and this is kind of the hardest thing, right? Like you can't really make people change their minds. You can wish they would, you can hope that you can persuade them. But fundamentally, it comes down to young people embracing diversity of thoughts. And that sounds really vague because it kind of is. Again, like I don't really think you can force people to believe anything. So I just hope that the appeal I'm making is at least somewhat persuasive in that regard. But I think that's really like the changes that would need to happen.
Yeah,
short of firing people, because one of the points of pushback that kind of cancel culture argument, orders, the people who are like pro, are often talk and write about cancel culture. A lot of the pushback that they get is that no one's actually being canceled, that no one's actually asking for anyone to get fired. A lot of these people end up quitting. They choose to quit. The Jordan Petersons of the world, they kind of find it's actually more lucrative for them to go private and be in a different scene. There's a whole kind of ecosystem that has sprung up around people who are seen as taking hard takes and doing contrarian views. So people often just self-censor, to your point, and take themselves out. That what they're really complaining about is being criticized and that nothing bad is actually happening to them. So given that we don't know the specifics of these policies you're describing where people can report on each other, I don't want to overly weight that. But I can see a world where it's nice to have a place on campus where folks could bring their grievances, have moderation, resolve disputes, have a conversation, short of saying you're going to be banished from campus the way you would if you had, say, sexually assaulted a fellow student, which, by the way, often doesn't happen when people sexually assault their fellow students, but that's a whole other conversation. Would that be objectionable to you to have that space if it didn't mean that students were going to be kind of excommunicated or kicked out of school? If there was a place for students to come and not report on each other, but resolve grievances?
To a certain degree, yes. And I think part of that is that I think college students are adults. And they shouldn't need like an adult arbiter to tell them how to resolve an interpersonal conflict.
Yeah.
And also, I know this is kind of like an idea that's just being thrown out, but I'm not really sure how this hypothetical resolution would work without some kind of like disciplinary coercive force.
You can't make the kid come. Yeah.
Right, exactly. If students want to create some kind of like restorative justice club or something, where if you have a fight with someone, you can resolve it, like that's fine. But I think anything created by administrators with the idea of handling like interpersonal agreements really sets up college students to not be able to handle themselves like adults who can handle interpersonal conflict individually, without having to pull in a third party. So I would just kind of be against it.
I know that adults really can't. Look, I'm torn here because kind of ideologically, I agree with a lot of your critics, to be honest. But in terms of what I would like to see happen in practice, I am also suspicious of a culture where people are doing all of this reporting and part of, kind of like ratting each other out.
That's so. It's the whole. We're ratting each other out to ICE. We're ratting each other out to the CIA. We're ratting each other out to NSA. We're ratting each other out to. What the hell? Gonna call your neighbors out because they're moving boxes into their house because they're moving in, but you don't like the way they look, so you're calling them out. It's a broken system, and cancel culture in colleges. It's oh man, we're not allowing the proper discord to take place. We're forcing these people to have their only Discord on, gaming, websites and stuff. Oh no. Yeah, and what's going to be the moderation? Old people with agendas, younger people with wealthy families. Who's the moderators? Who's the enforcer? Oh, well, that was Brianna Joy Gray on Bad Faith. Her Bad Faith podcast / YouTube show, and New York Times author / college student, Virginia student Emma Camp. So interesting discussion, but try not to watch a little bit more than half. So I think we should move on to my last discussion interview. Catherine Austin Fitz having a discussion with The Last American Vagabond. Ryan Christian, he does a show. Last American Vagabond is the network, I would guess you'd call it. There is 2 or 3 other people that will post underneath of it, including Whitney Webb, including some other very good independent journalists. But Ryan Christian is the main person that does it. Ooh, are we gonna have a good dad pun here? I wasn't paying attention. I don't know. Oh, the last American Vagabond? Yeah, that's fair. How does he know he's the last? That is presumptuous, I guess. And it's mostly him. So other people post under his, the call title, The Last American Vagabond. There's a few other people that do it, but it's mostly Ryan.
Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. Joining me today is Catherine Austin Fitts for a very exciting conversation that I've been really looking forward to. And this is in regard to a few different topics. One of the things that I've really been kind of diving through and discussing, and to the frustration of a lot of people being, irritatingly objective, as we like to put it, around the ingredients in the injection and what we're seeing within that and the evidence around that. So one of the people I wanted to talk to specifically about that topic, somebody who has been investigating a lot of different things, and somebody out there in this field that I respect more than most, and that's Catherine Austin Fitts. But we're also going to talk about some things around the Ukraine discussion and the biolabs and how this seems to kind of cross over into the larger discussion that we've had about COVID-19 and the larger agenda behind all of that, which, as we've discussed with her in the past, is the financial enslavement that's building. And we'll talk about the cryptocurrency addition to that a little bit and, where we see all of this going. And this is a conversation that needs to be had today for us to kind of flesh out where exactly we see all this building, because a lot of this is hypothetical. We're kind of taking the history around this, what we see them doing today, what we know about their actions, and kind of trying to piece this together. So I'm honored to have back on the show Catherine Austin Fitts. How are you today?
Hey, it's great to be back.
I always enjoy our conversations. I just find it actually opens up a lot of questions for me as well to continue to research into. It's
I know I keep, we do these quarterly wrap-ups on the Solari Report, and every quarter.
So this is an hour and 50-minute interview, and the whole time these two talk, there's no possible way I can play it this long, and mostly because this is on Rockfin. And mostly he does his show on Rockfin or Rumble because, and I used to follow him on DTube or Minds, I can't remember. But he posts mostly on blockchain, mostly because he has been censored by YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and everybody else. So I might get my stream knocked out here, so we will see how long they let me play.
We try to do the top 20 stories. We're now up to 55 unanswered questions. So it's the top 20 stories and the top 55 unanswered questions. So the questions just keep getting longer.
I mean, as much as that seems to frustrate people today, I love that. I mean, I think what that begins to show us is the interesting shift today that people don't like unanswered questions, right? They want to find someone who says, here's the answer, whether or not there's facts to back it up, as opposed to people that I would argue like yourself and myself, which would say, well, we're okay saying we don't know. In fact, we don't know probably most of these questions or the answers to them. And that's why we continue to do this. And I think it's the partisanship, the two-party paradigm is really dangerous in that regard, where people want a false answer over anything else.
So I'm a money person, and I spent many years on Wall Street or managing money or managing assets and risk positions. And, on Wall Street, if you understand the situation 3%, then you make money relative to the guy who understands it 2%. You can't wait until you have good information in many instances to trade. Just not trading is a trade. So you've got to work with the intelligence you have. And so you spend a fortune on trying to get great intelligence, but you're also prepared to operate in unbelievable uncertainty. And that's why I love to ask questions, because they help me create a framework for a situation. So a framework can help me sort of understand understand the world enough so that when the missile comes in, I can duck.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I don't have to stay frozen until I have perfect information. So I love to ask questions because that's what helps me get to the bottom of things, is asking questions.
Yeah, and that's actually an excellent analogy for where we are, because in that same
Right.
point, if you act on flagrantly incorrect information, it's going to be catastrophic to your trading or to the missile coming at your head, right? So it's
Right,
about.
but I can't wait to prove there's an iceberg before I turn the boat. I have to
Mhm.
turn the boat in time to miss the iceberg, and
Yes.
that may mean I have to do the best I can. So I
Yeah.
love questions, because to me, you've got to frame the uncertainty to solve it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's perfect for the Ukraine discussion or COVID-19. We got to start turning before we realize we're on top of it, right?
Well, I'll tell you something. I've spent a lot of time going through a lot of disinformation, as I know you do too.
Mhm.
And one of the ways that they market disinformation is to try and give you fake certainty.
Right.
You hunger for certainty, and so they give you fake certainty, and you fall for it because you just want, certainty.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah.
The idea of false certainty, my audience is well aware of. I've been drilling down. I mean, long before COVID, that's what the two-party paradigm provides. Exactly, it's false
Right.
certainty around the situation.
Right.
So let's start off today with the discussion of Ukraine, and just a couple of quick, interesting discussion points around how this seems to connect. And plenty would probably assume or imagine that it's easy to look at a conversation and draw parallels to things that you're otherwise researching, right? That's, confirmation bias and
Right.
so on. But
Right.
I feel very strongly that what we're seeing today, whether it's just because this COVID Great Reset agenda is so monumental, but it's hard not to see these overlaps into what's happening. And I found it really interesting, just to start, that not only are we seeing this very Red Scare era type of just racist mentality towards Russian people right now, which is totally being acceptable, which I'll show a couple points about just to get your thoughts on. But I found it really interesting that Meta, of all places, which I know we've talked about in regard to where this all seems to be going. Whitney and I talked about Meta and the metaverse
Right.
and all this. It comes out that apparently the Meta spokesperson, Andy Stone, has now stated that as a result of what he dubbed the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Meta has temporarily made allowances for forms of political expression that would normally violate its rules, like, quote, violent speech such as death to Russian invaders.
Okay.
It's like they're contradicting everything that they are to push in this agenda, saying the quiet part out loud, as I keep saying. And it said Stone added that the company, quote, won't allow credible calls for violence against Russian civilians. So now they're just differentiating between certain acceptable allowances of violent expression, because apparently it's okay to be violent against Russians. Now, this is sort of an abstract point, but I thought the Meta tie-in was interesting, and I just kind of wanted your thoughts on it before we jumped into more conversation.
So I call this the shriekometer. And the shriekometer is the machinery that gets turned on when you're trying to promote or force a particular narrative. And I've never seen the shriekometer as high as it's been since the West triggered the invasion.
Right. I'm glad you
by
said
Russia.
that.
So we've had a couple of very courageous politicians stand up and say, look, Russia has said for at least 10 years, if you do this, we will be forced to invade. It's a little bit like what Kennedy said during the Cuban Missile Crisis. If you do this, we will be forced to take military action.
Right.
So the Russians have been absolutely clear. If you try and circle us and create first strike capacity, we will stop you from doing that. So, and I think it was Tulsi Gabbard who got on Fox News and said, the problem with the coronavirus is it just didn't create enough. The problem with terrorism is it didn't create enough support for the defense budget. And we just see a blockbuster new budget for defense this last week. So here we are again, ready to support a big defense budget with a visible enemy. Anyway, so the reality is that and Gabbard said, we caused this invasion. They have said for many, many years, and you almost wonder if Biden isn't speaking to the investors when we say we will not intercede militarily. He's despite the shriekometer, he's promising the investors,
walk the dog.
That yes, we triggered this invasion, and yes, we're not going to do anything about it. So we're watching a game go on, in my opinion. And it's very interesting because to me, the most interesting thing that has happened, other than the multiple occurrences of the splitting of the financial systems now into something that gives much more power and strength to the Chinese system.
Mm-hmm.
So
Are you
really,
talking about the sticking off the SWIFT system and how they're now working together outside of that?
well, China and Russia have been working on a Chinese alternative to SWIFT.
Mm-hmm.
But we see Visa leave Russia and Sberbank, the largest Russian bank, move into the mere Chinese system. So we're watching a real significant resources and allocation of power into the Chinese and Asian system.
Right.
So I think of this as a dramatic event that signals the rise of the land empire, and the Silk Road is definitely on. And there's a whole bunch of people globally who clearly want to take big equity positions before it goes any further.
Mm-hmm.
So this is their opportunity to do that.
I like it.
So you believe, or what are your thoughts on whether this is a byproduct of what's happening, or rather something that was driven into action because of the larger kind of Great Reset financial shift? Do you think this is an intentional action?
So I think this is being this is in part inspired by what I call the going direct reset, which is to me the real reset is the central bankers reset. But I also think there's real tension here because